From a highly secure network of top secret locations across South Texas, this is the Spurs Insider. I'm Mike Finger, joined by our panel of Express News Spurs beat writers, Jeff McDonald and Tom Orsborn. And I'm just going to start out by saying that we are recording this the day after one of the gosh darndest things I've ever covered. And that is not hyperbole. That is not sarcasm. Tom and Jeff, Nick Talbot, sports editor, is here as well. Just popped in. Just want to throw that out there. Tom, what did you think when you saw Gregg Popovich walk through that door to be there for that Mitch Johnson introductory press conference?
Well, I mean, we weren't expecting it, but was anyone surprised that he was able to do that and do it so well?
I was on I had heard rumblings that it might happen and just did not, I refused to believe it. I didn't think that there was any way that he would do this. And apparently there were people around Gregg Popovich who has been busting his tail in physical therapy, who has been showing up to the Rock every day with Timmy and Manu, who's been working with all his physical therapists of all kinds, trying to help a 76-year-old man recover from a stroke 6 months ago. And for all the reasons that you might expect, there were people who said, you know, Pop, do you really need to do this? So many things could have gone wrong. You know, yeah, take a stumble, lose your bearings. Just those of us who have ever had to speak in public, like, you know, things can go wrong even to people who aren't trying to come back from a stroke. You can't find your words at some point. That this had the potential to just not go well. And this guy who has, for decades of his career, made a point of not wanting to make a show of things and not wanting to call attention to himself, decided that it was worth his while and something that he owed to the fans, to Mitch Johnson, to the players, to everybody who cared about the Spurs, to be there and kind of show that he was granting his blessing to this, that he was retiring of his own accord, and that he was excited about what was happening next. I'm almost sounding too effusive, Jeff, for people's comfort, but it really was something.
You at the beginning you called it the one of the most gosh darn things you've ever covered.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Were you like, in honor of Pop, you're keeping it clean?
Exactly.
You know, that's what he would have wanted. Yeah. The moment was.
Go ahead.
The moment was. I mean, it's going to go down, and maybe we use this kind of phrase a little too much, but like one of the most memorable moments in Spurs history. You know.
Yeah.
Pop basically, I guess kind of a retirement announcement, even though he had already made the announcement via written statement a couple days before. I wasn't expecting to lay eyes on him. I'll be honest. I wasn't expecting that to happen. For some of the reasons you mentioned, he's a guy that, as we all know, wants to keep the private stuff private as best as he can. And this was him choosing to open up the curtain, and for the reasons you mentioned. And one of the more important reasons he did that was to sort of kind of maybe symbolically or not so symbolically bestow his blessing on Mitch Johnson and kind of show the fan base, I guess, that this is the guy we are picking. I'm behind this. This is who I want to succeed me as the head coach of the Spurs. So,
Yeah.
you know, it was all of that wrapped into one. It was the end of something and the beginning of something all in one press conference, and you don't normally get that.
And it was keeping with who he is. I mean, it took guts, you know. He had guts to fire Bob Hill, guts to champion international players like he did, guts to hire Becky Hammond, you know, guts to speak truth to power like he did so often in the last since 2016. So, I mean, it's in keeping who he was. That's why I said I was surprised to see him, but I wasn't surprised. You know, it was the gutsy thing to do.
We've talked for years, and Jeff, the you can only grow so many tomatoes line was in Miami, I believe. It was either after the 13 or it was before game 7 and like 13,
Yes,
which is
correct.
12 years ago,
Correct.
when people were asking him about why he was still doing this. That's 12 years of at least of retirement speculation, which is just crazy to think about. Um, but for that long, when we've kind of talked amongst ourselves about the idea of Gregg Popovich retiring, first of all, it just for a long time it was inconceivable to even think about. You couldn't process the idea of the Spurs or the NBA or basketball without that guy. But when we would talk about how it might happen if it did, I think something that all three of us agreed on always, and most people who've covered Gregg Popovich agreed on, is that the most likely retirement would be a Tim Duncan like retirement. He was not like we never thought that he would
Press
show up
release.
and toot his own horn. It would be a press release retirement, and then sail off into the sunset and never to be heard from again. And I think that if it was a normal Gregg Popovich retirement, that we might have seen that. But because of the circumstances,
Yeah.
because he did suffer a stroke, because he did have all, one of the first things he said when he made his way to the microphone was how much he appreciates all the well wishes and the prayers and thoughts and all that type of stuff that people have offered him over this past 6 months. I think because of those circumstances, he felt he owed it to people to show up and thank them. And if he had just had a playoff exit 2 weeks ago and was retiring, I don't think he would have felt the need to do that. But there was a lot of gratitude there for the support he's gotten since he suffered this stroke. And then to reiterate what Jeff said, there's this idea that the Spurs had to go outside the organization, and we can talk about this more later, to go hire an all-star, coveted, up and coming or established head coach to replace Gregg Popovich. He recognized, to use Mitch Johnson's term, he understood the moment of how much it would mean to show the world, to show not the world really, to show San Antonio, to show the fans that Mitch Johnson was his guy. And I think that meant a lot to people in San Antonio. Like by the end of yesterday, I'm sure like all of us were, getting emails from around the world. Like when you write about Manu Ginobili or Victor Wembanyama or whoever, people talking
Right.
about how much it meant to them just to see Gregg Popovich's face again, to see him talking, to see him with Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili. That meant a great deal. And as much as Pop liked to kind of poo-poo his own importance over the years, and say, that anybody could do what he did, and he wasn't doing brain surgery or anything like that. Like, he understood the moment. He understood what he means to people. He understood what that image would mean to people to see him there with Mitch. And I give him a heck of a lot of credit for it.
Yeah, two other things I'd say about yesterday, the Pop portion of yesterday. One, I mean, obviously it was jarring to see him that way. We have not laid eyes on him since he was healthy,
Mhm.
and moving slowly, needing help, voice weaker than we all remember. Um, I'm actually told he's improved immensely, which is also part of that story. But it was good for him to immediately. You could see his mind was still sharp because the sense of humor was there. You mentioned one of the first things he said when he got to the microphone was to thank the people and the fans and express gratitude. Actually, the first thing he did was bust Don Harris's chops.
Yeah.
That was the first thing out of his mouth, was something along the lines of, you guys all know why we're here, except for Don. He never knows what's going on. And so it was a good way of breaking the ice and showing that sense of humor. And that sense of humor popped up in his remarks. Obviously, there was the moment at the end where he reveals his new title via his T-shirt that everyone kind of laughed about. So, and I think that was a very Pop move too. He knows that he doesn't he knows that appearance was a little jarring, to use the word I used earlier. And instead of, he didn't want it to be everyone feel sorry for me, everyone be sad for me. He wanted to lighten the mood. And I think that was a total Pop move. So that was one thing. And the other thing was just like we talk about, people talk about Spurs culture and Spurs family so much, and it becomes a little trite, and it becomes a little, you're just saying words to say words, and it's overblown and blah blah blah. I mean, I would say that about any NBA professional team talking that way. But the
Like little league teams are starting to use that now. It's college teams and high school. It's our culture,
The Spurs, the quote unquote Spurs family though, was on full display at that thing yesterday. I mean, you had Tim Duncan and Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, basically, escorting Pop around. And there was, if you watched those two, even when Pop was sitting and somebody else was talking, they were very gentle with Pop and caring. I would use the word loving, like putting their hands on him and like patting him and just interacting with him and to see all the there were other former players out, to see DeJounte Murray come in, and he came in for two reasons, one for Pop and the other for his buddy Mitch Johnson. But just to see all that and the way it transpired and to see that part of the culture on full display at that press conference, it leads into why hire Mitch Johnson when you could have hired, somebody with more head coaching experience, or someone who had won an NBA title before, or someone who had coached teams in the playoffs or coached stars before. And the reason is because none of those people have the Spurs experience that Mitch Johnson would have. And it's a very specific kind of experience that the Spurs apparently believe that you need to continue what they're building with this Victor Wembanyama era. And it wasn't just go get the best X's and O's guys or go get a guy that has won a title before. It's, we want a guy that has been here from before Victor even got here and knows what we're building and is on the same page. And we all know we're on the same page. And so I think the Spurs family, Spurs culture aspect it's a direct through line to why Mitch Johnson instead of, name your more famous coach who's been a head coach before.
That's an excellent segue that I'm going to derail a little bit because
dang it,
something else you mentioned during that excellent summary of what you saw yesterday was the way Manu and Tim were with Pop. And there was a moment about midway through Pop's speech where there was a long pause, and like everyone in the room, I don't know if you guys felt this way, but there was a sense of nervousness there. Like, is he going to make it through this? And I was struck by how Tim and Manu, standing on either side of him over his shoulders, they kind of, to me, I might be making too much of this. They took charge in a way kind of with the look of, he's going to make it through this. Everything is okay. And it was just something that I'm almost like, I almost gave myself goosebumps just talking about it, because they said, we're not going to step in and help him. We're not going to prompt him in any way. We're not going to give him a cue. He's going to do this. And it was such a vote of confidence. It was such I'm sounding way too,
I don't think you could
emotional here during this, but it was like they let him do it, and he did it. It was something that he did for them, I'm sure, so many times over the years, of just, you've got this. Things might be going against you, but I'm not going to call timeout here.
Not call the timeout. Yeah.
I'm going to let you play through this, knowing that you can get through it. And those two guys, as much as anybody in that practice gym, knew exactly what he was capable of, because not only because they'd spent 20 years with him, but they've been showing up every day for his workouts at the Rock.
That was another thing.
It was really something, man. I will never forget that. Yeah. Somebody can take over here, because I've just knocked myself down off my feet.
Getting a little dusty over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it was, you're exactly right. And what when he talked about those two guys going through the workouts with him, or the rehab sessions, I should say, that conjured so many images in my mind, of just the support they gave him, and physical, mental, just yeah, that just came to mind, that those guys were with him throughout what must have been very hard, very difficult sessions.
And when he made the joke, of course, he always has the right joke about how the reason Timmy and Manu were there was for payback. And there's two connotations of that word, right? Potman and the funny, payback as in revenge
Revenge,
type
yeah.
of thing. Like, we're gonna get back at you for all the torturous workouts you put us through. But then there's the other definition of payback, which means literally paying you back. And I think that part of it um superseded the other. I mean, of course it did. Like, they're there because they owe him for all that Pop had done for them over the years. It's really, really cool stuff.
Like I
Um,
wonder if there's another franchise in the NBA where something circumstances like this would happen, where you have two long retired former players showing up at an ailing coach's rehab sessions to
well, the difference
help
there,
out.
the reason there's not is because no other coach has coached for 29 years.
Yes.
Um, I'm sure that if who's behind him, Spo, like Dwayne Wade would probably come back for Spo at some point. Somebody like that. But the Spurs are so unique in that way that they've had the same people running things for so long, and that's the way to get back to your brilliant segue that I ruined. And that what you said earlier about Mitch Johnson carrying that on. I think that there are other to kind of quibble with your point a little bit. There are other coaching candidates out there who could have offered some Spurs connections. But it
Yeah.
would not be Spurs like in the way that this guy came in. It's kind of cool. He came in the same year that Brian Wright did 9 years ago, um, with DeJounte Murray when they drafted DeJounte Murray in 2016. And he put in the work. He did the work. He earned everything that came to him every step of the way, from the G
Yeah.
League to the back of the bench to the front of the bench to becoming the acting head coach. And the way the Spurs look at things is, if you do the work and you earn everything that comes your way, like, why would we take that away from you? Why would we say that's not good enough and find someone else to do it? The more I thought about it, I've been going back and forth on this, like I think a lot of us have over ever since Pop's been out, and when we've considered the thought of who would be next for the long term. And as Mitch Johnson did what he did over the past 6 months, and it wasn't leading a team to a playoff berth, and it wasn't pulling off a bunch of huge upsets. It was just doing what the Spurs expected the Spurs to do this year. Even with Victor Wembanyama out, even with other injury situations, they were better than when they started. It felt like there was progress being made. Um, it would just seem so unspurs like to
Yeah.
say, okay, then we're going to take that away from you and go to someone else.
That was the
Now,
right
I
thing
will,
to do. Yeah.
for the sake of the listeners out there who are saying, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, yes, Mitch is a great story. Yes, it's the right thing to do. But you have been gifted this historically fortuitous break of landing Victor Wembanyama and then following Victor Wembanyama with the next Rookie of the Year and Stephon Castle, and you have De'Aaron Fox in the fold. Don't you owe it to yourself as an organization to go out and get the best coach money come by? I understand that. Um, and it's not something that I just dismiss out of hand, but I think that the way the Spurs run things, the way the Spurs have always done things, they see it not as that they settled for Mitch Johnson, but they had the opportunity to hire someone who fits so perfectly into what they're trying to build. And I'm not going to tell them they're wrong for that.
Yeah, I mean, I understand both of those arguments, and if they had gone and thrown, millions of dollars at like a Michael Malone, I wouldn't have faulted him for that. But likewise, I understand the thinking behind letting Mitch continue with kind of what he did last year. Although, I talked to someone about, outside the organization about, how much did you watch Mitch this year in the Spurs with Mitch, and what kind of coach do you think he is? And that person said, well, anyone outside the Spurs organization that's telling you he's a good coach or a bad coach is blowing smoke, because nobody knows, because he didn't really have his team last year. They didn't have Victor Wembanyama for 40 something games. And they didn't have a guy over 6'9" for some of those games. And
Yeah.
you're still running all of Pop's stuff. And by the way, Mitch didn't go into the season thinking he's going to be the head coach. He was just dropped into it. So the best thing, the best thing you can say for the job Mitch did last year, and it's a very big thing, is the whole thing didn't just completely capsize. Like he kept it afloat, and they won. Nobody in here is going to throw a river parade for 34 wins, but that's the most they've got. They've won since 2018, 2019, so they did make an improvement, even wins losses wise, with Victor out for a third of the season and De'Aaron Fox coming in mid-season and then him going out. And then, so I think we're going to learn a lot more about what kind of a day-to-day coach Mitch Johnson is going into this season, assuming everybody's healthy and they kind of have closer to the roster that they want to have to compete. At the same time, I think he showed enough last year to be given the opportunity, the opportunity to show more of what he's got this year. So I don't know. I sometimes you'll get on the bad social media sites that are toxic and throughout the season, and people just like complaining about Mitch Johnson. I'm like, I don't see this at all. I don't see this at all.
This changed throughout the year, when Victor was out, when the whole thing when De'Aaron was out, when the whole thing started going the way it obviously was going to go. But I remember talking on this podcast early in the Mitch Johnson era, after he'd taken over, kind of marveling about how much better the Spurs were in third quarters than last year. You remember that when he had his team together?
Yeah.
And I thought that was like that. I don't want to make too much of that, but it was like he was making halftime adjustments. When he had his team, he was making the adjustments. He was keeping his team engaged. They were coming out and they looked like a well-coached team. I don't think it was, I think there are reasons, even basketball related, like not big picture, not Spurs culture and that type of stuff. I think there are basketball reasons to believe that Mitch Johnson knows what he's doing, and that when he has his full team around him. And also, by the way, I would think they're going to be in the market for an assistant coach or two, right? Like I don't know. I don't have any firsthand knowledge on Brett Brown. He might be back, but the Brett Brown thing was I know he was hired because of Pop to kind of serve as a sounding board for him. And I don't know if he comes back, but I'll tell you now, if you're an assistant coach in this league, an up and comer who wants an opportunity, like they should be able to hire a top notch staff around Mitch for sure. Like that's going to be a job where you could envision, if you're a guy who wants to be a head coach someday, to come in and work with this staff for a while and maybe get a job somewhere else. And I don't think that's how people viewed jobs as Spurs assistants
recently
over the past 4 or 5 years, since 2019 or so. So I think that's going to change, and that should be an opportunity for improvement within the organization as well.
I assume there are people, fans around the league who are going, Gregg Popovich is retiring. Who is Mitch Johnson? Like, why, who? And it kind of reminds me, I mean,
like that guy in Phoenix.
Yeah. But it kind of reminds me of,
tell the story just because to lighten the mood a little bit about
all right,
Jeff or Tom.
Well, it was me, but let me finish my point, and then I'll tell them. It was when was I it was the first time I was in Phoenix. It wasn't the April trip, but it was, I don't know, was that in January or December?
It was after the New Year, I think.
Yeah. And I guess so. But yeah,
It was not new news.
the point is Gregg Popovich had been sidelined for months at this point. And then we go into, we watch a whole NBA basketball game. The Spurs lose to the Suns. We go to the post-game presser. It was me and maybe two other reporters from Phoenix. One of them is like a radio guy with one of those. I can't even.
Furniture might have been there.
Yeah. Furniture was there. One of those like cassette players like my parents had. They were portable at the time, but they were like the size of a toaster, and a microphone stuck into that. And anyway, we interview Mitch about the game, and then Mitch leaves the room, and that guy with the toaster turns to me and goes,
Conceivably a reporter.
"Yes." Goes, now who was that? The man had coached an entire basketball game, like in front of people, like in public.
Didn't he ask you where Pop was?
I said, yeah, that's Mitch Johnson. That's the assistant coach. He's taken over for Pop. Oh, what happened to Pop?
What happened to Pop? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
when you're losing the as a news organization, when you're losing even like the 90-year-old crowd, which is what this guy was, we're doomed. But anyway,
people around the country are wondering who Mitch Johnson was.
I mean, my point is, there was once upon a time, the Heat had a very famous coach, one of the most famous coaches in NBA history, named Pat Riley. And Pat Riley, what does he do? One day he decides he's going to retire from the coaching part of the biz and join the front office ranks just full time. And everyone in the country is going, who the heck is Eric Spoelstra? Never heard of this guy. This is the guy that's going to coach the LeBron James Heat. Like, what? Like that? How can you possibly entrust the Heat Big Three era to this no name? And that seemed to work out. And there are other every coach who is, I mean, this is an obvious point, but every coach who is famous, even the ones that are in the Hall of Fame, once upon a times were nobodies. You have to start somewhere. No one's heard of Mark Daignault before he was named Oklahoma City's coach, and
and he blew that game last night. Like so,
Yeah.
so there you go.
So there you go.
And
So one of these days, the Spurs are going to blow game one of the Western Conference semifinals.
with Mitch, you look at the body of work throughout the season. Some fans, like Jeff made reference to on some social media sites, they want to see this happen every game, but there were games where he drew up the correct game-winning plays. There were games when he had things that he said at halftime, adjustments or motivational wise, that helped them. There were times when he talked to certain players, Jeremy and Devin come to mind, especially Devin, where he got a little bit more out of them than they might have done in the past. So there was enough of that here and there to show that he can do the job and should, have this opportunity going forward.
I would see people like, this is my least favorite thing to ever read, is people complaining about like rotations and why did this guy play and not that guy play.
Yeah.
And I'm
There are
just
almost
like,
zero decisions to make in that regard this year.
exactly. And I'm also like, but these same people were complaining about Pop's rotations, the last time he was they just,
I don't like talking about those people.
Anyway,
I think the best thing to do is, but I will tell you this.
the point.
I will compliment you on the Spo thing, which is like dead on, down to the fact that just out of curiosity, I just looked up how old he was when in 2008 when he took over. You care to guess?
38.
He was about to turn 38. Yeah,
he was younger then. Than Mitch.
And he'd been an assistant in Miami for about a decade, a little longer than Mitch.
Started
an assistant in San Antonio, but Spo started in the film room. Mitch started in the G League. Very similar. And now Eric Spoelstra is the longest tenured coach in the league.
And look, I don't think we're all sitting here going, this is absolutely going to work out. Mitch is going to, I mean, I think he deserves the chance and has a chance to be great, but nothing's guaranteed. We're not telling people that, but we can totally see why. I mean, once you think about it, you can totally see why Mitch, and you can make the argument for him. Even if some fans disagree and think it should have gone some other way, I think you have to at least acknowledge the reasons why they went the way they did.
Yeah, and like I said, even though I wasn't sure a month ago how this was going to go, and even though on the day that the Spurs made the Pop announcement, and I started hearing from people almost immediately with the Spurs saying, that we're not going to do a coaching search here. It's going to be the guy who's already there. I was a little bit taken aback by that at first.
Yeah.
Just how quickly it developed and how quickly they decided to make that decision. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that was just the Spurs way all along. Of course, that's the way the Spurs were going to do it.
And maybe this is obvious, but like if they were going to give it to Mitch, of course they were going to give it to him immediately. Like they weren't gonna like have a coaching search and interview guys and then decide it was Mitch. Like that would be not fair, I don't think. So,
all of this was done the Spurs way. And the Spurs way doesn't always mean a championship every year, but and we've talked about this many times before, just the advantages that they have of sticking with the process and sticking with the same people in charge. Like that pays off in a big way for them in so many ways. And it's hard to argue with continuing that approach. The other thing I wanted to get back to on Pop that ties into what we're talking about now is he, as Jeff said, was very sharp in making the points that he wanted to make and making the jokes that he wanted to make. And he also went out of his way to continue to talk about continue to talk about how we expect to keep winning games and we're not going to let you down. And that was his way of saying, like, I'm still involved in this. And yeah, the shirt did that too, the LFA. He's the president of basketball ops, but he's going to stay involved. And I think that's significant in a lot of ways. I think people were happy to hear him say that it wasn't like I think Mitch is going to win. It's we're going to win. And that was a cool thing.
So we're going to do it classy too. Threw that in.
Do it classy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. You guys got any like pop memories you want to share? Any behind
That's the thing. We could do this for weeks. But what
I don't know.
Were either of you reflective in any way of?
I just like all the funny stuff behind the scenes we witnessed over the years. The one-liners, the same two bozos thing in Milwaukee. The time
so many of them are just like that's not even a great story.
No.
But go ahead and tell that because it involves the furniture as well. Our friend podcast Taylor.
I have a million of them. There's like the time
instead of saying I have a million of them, which we do, and not trying to wait for the best ones, because this isn't one of the best ones. It's not even sure it's top 50%. But it's the fun thing about Pop is just you can mention a throwaway one like this one, and it's funny. So go ahead and tell it. It's Milwaukee.
Yeah, it was the year after the Bucks won the championship, whatever the year that was. They were the defending champions. The Spurs were bad, not a good team.
We were wearing masks on press row. I remember that. We were in the TV seats. Yeah,
I remember we were on TV seats. I didn't know we were still wearing masks, but
I think we were.
The Spurs go in there with this bad team. I think if I might be wrong, but it seems to me that like Bryn Forbes had a big game.
Yeah,
to pull that one out. They beat the defending champions on their home floor at a year where they're not winning much at all. And we go back there to the post-game interview room, and it's just me and Mike Finger. And those are the only two people were classified as humans sitting in that room. But
because there was the Spurs video guy extraordinaire, Taylor Hare, in the background, who just doesn't count because he blends in.
Okay, so after this big victory, Pop walks in, sees it's just the two of us, is almost a little crestfallen, a little bit.
Because it was a rousing victory.
Yes,
it was like the Spurs played great and beat the defending champs, like in a hugely impressive way.
The way I picture in my mind is he walks through that door and his shoulders slump just ever so slightly as he sees it's just me and you. And he shakes his head and he says, "Win of the century," and it's the same two bozos. And the punchline, of course, is there's a third bozo there that didn't even count.
Yeah, yeah. And
It's
said it in a
Spurs.
way that was not, he had that knack of doing that and not being insulting about it. Like it was almost a compliment to be one of the bozos. Anyway,
You know,
we could do that every week, every podcast till eternity to tell a Pop story. But go ahead, Tom.
back to Miami. Mentioning Spoelstra. So, the 2014 championship to me still doesn't get enough, enough acclaim to lose in that dramatic, gut-wrenching fashion in 7 games to the Heat before, and then to come back and win that. That to me is one of the great NBA stories. And I think too of Buck Harvey wrote that column about how Pop was, moping around after losing in 2013, and his daughters, finally had enough of it and said, poor Greggy, poor you, and that snapped him out of it. And but just to come back and climb that hill again, and to win it all with that beautiful game, that just like I said, I think it's an NBA story that doesn't get enough acclaim.
It's in the history, not just of the Spurs, but of the NBA. I'm not sure there's many title runs like that, to go from, as Tom said, the absolute just gut-wrenching emotional bottom of, because it's not a young team that gets its heart broken in game 6 and game 7. It's an old team. That was a team that, like, it was going to be the last hurrah in 2013 of Tim and Tony and Manu and those guys on that team. It was an old team. And how lucky are they? How amazing is this that they're giving it another chance? It's 6 years in 2013. It's 6 years since their previous championship. It's 14 years since Tim's first. Like, how on earth are they going to? How do they get this lucky to be able to be on the brink of another one, and then to have that taken away? An old team. Well, that's just bag breaking. You're never going to overcome that. How could you overcome that? And then to come back the next year and be even better
and play the same team,
to beat the same team.
And at the time, the most lopsided finals in terms of point differential in history.
It's a great story. And Pop in game 6 in 2013. I mean, he explained it well, and they were, the rebounding situation, but he took a beating for that. I'm sure he was down in the dumps. Maybe publicly he didn't question himself. Maybe privately he was. But
do either of you? Because you probably don't, because this is such a small moment. But do you remember how the final buzzer sounds? Game 5 in 2014, they've won the title. All the things you just talked about, slayed the dragon, et cetera, et cetera. They finally won that title, that elusive 5th title. Confetti's coming down at the AT&T Center. Do you remember Pop's reaction? He just sat. I have this vivid memory of him. He's just sitting on the bench, not smiling.
Yeah,
not almost lost in thought, reflective. I don't know. He's like, there's confetti coming down. The players are going nuts, and Pop is just sitting on the bench, just contemplating. Maybe everything we just said. I don't know.
I never thought of this, but that's the exact reaction he had in Tokyo when they won the gold medal. I think, and that's fitting, because I think those are the 2 single victories that probably meant the most to him in his entire career. Were that last title, because of everything we just described as to how it's just emotionally huge it was to come back and get that last one when it seemed like everything was done, and then to win that gold medal that he wanted since he was a teenager, for his country. And in both cases, it wasn't jump up and down, be excited. It was just sort of stunned appreciation of what he and those around him had accomplished.
In contrast, do you recall the reaction to him winning his first NBA game? Because this was making the social media rounds in the last couple of days.
First NBA game or first NBA title?
The first game he won as head coach of the Spurs after he's replaced Bob Hill.
No,
they're playing in Dallas. Dallas has like a shot at the buzzer to win the game. It misses. Number one, Sean and Avery are celebrating like they just won the title, and then pans to the sideline, and there's guys hugging Pop, and he's jumping around like he just won this showcase showdown on The Price is Right. So just to think how his maybe perspective changed over the course of 29 years, that's kind of funny too, because we couldn't imagine Pop doing that now, right?
No, that's cool. That's cool.
Right.
Anything else before we go? Well, this won't be the last time we talk about Pop. There'll be plenty more of that over the years.
Again, okay, take politics out of it, but at the end, for him to speak out like he did so many times because he thought it was the right thing to do, that's there's no telling how many the hate mail he got, maybe dirty looks from some people in the ownership group that didn't agree with him, but he kept doing it. And to me, that just it's a lot of guts there.
Yeah, during the George Floyd protests that happened kind of at the same time as we were all doing this job on Zoom, so all the interviews were on Zoom.
Yes, I remember that.
We weren't in the arenas at all.
Yep.
I guess the Coaches Association got together and met and decided they were going to use each coach would use some of their pregame time to kind of talk about social justice issues, but didn't tell, or at least on the Spurs end, didn't tell us. So we get on a pregame Zoom. The Spurs are playing Lord knows where, and so you can find this transcript somewhere because I typed it out. They open it up to questions, and I say, "Is Marco Bellinelli's on the injury report? Is Marco Bellinelli available tonight?" And then Pop said, "Well, first of all, before I get to that, I need to talk about this," and gave this whole, I don't know, a whole, 3-minute, 5-minute soliloquy on a history lesson on like Black Wall Street or something.
I think that might have been Billie Holiday's song "Strange Fruit."
That's what it was.
Yes.
Yes.
And if you don't know about that, thanks to Pop, you may know about it now. And if you don't know about it now, look it up. Strange Fruit.
So he talked about it for 5, 6, 7 minutes long soliloquy. At the very end, he finishes that and says, "To answer your question, Marco Bellinelli is out tonight."
On that note, some people are rolling their eyes at what Tom and Jeff have mentioned and about how the guts that it took and that type of thing. And there's, we all get emails and comments from people all the time about how he's self-important and he's doing this just to draw attention to himself and blah, blah, blah. He should shut up and coach. But just think that through. And this is what has always sort of bothered me about that criticism. Even if he's doing what is the upside for him? Right. He's not running for president. He's not trying to sell a podcast. Like, he's not going to go monetize this in any way. If he gets attention for it, and he does get attention for it, like what does that do for him? There is no personal upside to speaking out the way he did. For some people, you might see it. Sure, there might be others who speak out because it might benefit them in some way. I'm not saying, I'm not casting aspersions, casting doubt on people who speak up. Anybody who wants to speak up should, even if they do get something out of it. But my point is with Gregg Popovich doesn't like attention. He doesn't want to be patted on the back and stuff like that. And so like he's not going to run for office. He's not going to do any of that type of stuff. There was only downside for him to do it personally. And like there were people, in the organization, members of the ownership group don't skew his direction politically. There were people who, in the city, the city isn't totally blue. Like you run the risk of hurting your business. You run the risk of alienating people. He did it anyway because, like Tom said, he thought it was the right thing to do. Right. And for people to be so, I understand being jaded in today's day and age, but to be so jaded as to say, oh, he was just doing that for X, Y, or Z, there was far more downside for him than upside for him.
Well, to reinforce it, and then I'll shut up, but prior to 2016, unless you knew him well, or you did not know his political stripe, You didn't know what his politics were publicly. He said nothing. But in 2016, it was just, he was following his convictions, following his heart. And I really admire him for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll get back and do this again soon. More Spurs basketball to talk about with lottery and potential draft picks, maybe some potential moves in the offseason. We'll talk a lot more about Mitch Johnson and staff and the program he's trying to build. But this is one of those weeks where I think, not to sound too corny, it was a privilege to be there for that. That's something that you don't see very often, that we might never see again, and I was glad to witness it in person. So I think that my fellow panelists are ready to go, and so we'll leave on an upbeat note, as we always try to leave on. Until next time, take care of each other and keep it real.